In the quiet mountain town of South Park, Colorado, one name has become synonymous with the impossible: Kenny McCormick. Born into poverty and destined for repetition, this orange parka wearing fourth grader has experienced something no human should endure: death itself, again and again, only to return the next day as if nothing happened. His friends forget. The world moves on, but Kenny remembers each gruesome end. Tonight, we journey through the complete chronicle of Kenny's deaths and mysterious resurrections, exploring the dark comedy that has defined his existence and the cosmic forces that keep him trapped in an endless cycle of mortality and rebirth. The phenomenon that would define Kenny McCormick's existence began on August 13th, 1997, in the very first episode of South Park, titled "Cartman Gets an Anal Probe." This inaugural death established not merely a running gag, but a fundamental element of the show's mythology that would persist for decades. The complexity of this first demise revealed the creative ambitions behind what might have appeared to be simple shock humor, setting a template that future deaths would both follow and elaborate upon. During the chaotic events surrounding Cartman's alien encounter, Kenny found himself at the epicenter of extraterrestrial activity. The sequence of his death unfolded with the mechanical precision of a Rube Goldberg machine, each element contributing to an inevitable conclusion. When the alien spacecraft fired its powerful beam, Kenny became an unwitting victim of cosmic forces beyond his comprehension. The blast launched his small frame with tremendous force, sending him careening through the air like a rag doll caught in a hurricane. The trajectory of his flight carried him directly into the path of a cattle stampede, where the confused and frightened animals trampled his broken body beneath their hooves. Yet even this violent encounter with livestock proved insufficient to complete his demise. As Kenny lay motionless in the street, Officer Barbrady's police cruiser delivered the final blow, the vehicle's weight crushing what remained of the boy's fragile form. The aftermath revealed the show's willingness to push boundaries even further, as a swarm of rats emerged to consume Kenny's remains, leaving nothing but scattered bones and the iconic orange parka. This elaborate death sequence established several crucial elements that would define Kenny's future demises: the multi-stage nature of his destruction, the involvement of multiple external forces, and the complete obliteration of his physical form all became recurring themes. More significantly, the casual reaction of his friends introduced the audience to one of the show's most enduring mysteries: the selective amnesia that would allow Kenny's deaths to occur without lasting consequence to the narrative structure. Stan Marsh's immortal words, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," followed by Kyle Broflovsky's response, "You bastards," became more than mere catchphrases. These exclamations represented the only acknowledgement Kenny's deaths would receive, brief moments of recognition before the world moved forward as if nothing had occurred. The dialogue established a ritual that would accompany nearly every subsequent death, creating a sense of ceremony around what might otherwise be viewed as senseless violence. The second episode Weight Gain 4000 introduced a different methodology to Kenny's destruction while maintaining the essential elements established in the premiere. When Mr. Garrison attempted to assassinate Kathy Lee Gifford during her visit to South Park, his rifle shot went astray, striking Kenny instead. The impact sent the boy flying through the air with such force that he became impaled upon a flagpole, the metal shaft piercing completely through his skull. This death demonstrated the show's willingness to employ increasingly graphic imagery while maintaining its animated format's ability to distance viewers from the true horror of such violence. The flagpole impalement also introduced the concept of Kenny as an unintended victim caught in the crossfire of events beyond his control or understanding. Unlike the alien encounter of the previous episode, where Kenny's presence seemed almost predestined, this death appeared genuinely accidental. The randomness of his selection as victim emphasized his role as the expendable member of the group, the one whose loss would not fundamentally alter the social dynamics among the remaining boys. As the series progressed into its third episode, Volcano, Kenny's death took on an environmental dimension that would become another recurring theme during the boys' hunting expedition with Uncle Jimbo and Ned Gerblansky. A volcanic eruption threatened the entire region. The natural disaster created chaos and confusion, setting the stage for another elaborate demise. A massive, flaming boulder ejected from the volcano's crater with tremendous force crashed to Earth directly in front of Kenny. The initial impact of the boulder created a spectacular display of sparks and flame, setting Kenny's arm ablaze. As he attempted to extinguish the fire, the boulder continued its relentless momentum, rolling forward to crush his small body beneath its weight. The combination of burning and crushing represented an escalation in the complexity of Kenny's deaths, introducing multiple simultaneous threats rather than the sequential dangers of previous episodes. The volcanic setting also demonstrated how the show would use various locations and scenarios to create fresh contexts for Kenny's demise. The fourth episode, Big Gay Al's Big Gay Boat Ride, transported Kenny's death into the realm of organized sports, specifically the brutal world of elementary school football. During a game against the Middle Park Cowboys, Kenny found himself overwhelmed by opponents whose size and strength far exceeded his own. Two larger players seized his arms, pulling in opposite directions with sufficient force to tear the limbs from their sockets. As Kenny stood defenseless and mutilated, a third player delivered a devastating tackle that separated his head from his shoulders. This particular death stood out for its deliberate brutality, perpetrated not by adults or external forces, but by other children. The violence carried disturbing implications about the nature of competition and the casual acceptance of harm in pursuit of victory. The sight of elementary school students dismembering their opponent with methodical efficiency suggested a commentary on the increasingly aggressive nature of youth sports and society's willingness to overlook violence when it occurs. Within accepted frameworks, the dismemberment theme reached its pinnacle in the sixth episode, Pink Eye, which introduced supernatural elements to Kenny's death mythology. After being struck by a Soviet satellite and subsequently embalmed with contaminated soy sauce, Kenny returned from the dead as a zombie. This transformation marked the first time Kenny's death led directly to his resurrection within the same episode, albeit in a corrupted form that threatened the entire town. The zombie Kenny possessed all the traditional characteristics of the undead, including an insatiable hunger for human flesh and the ability to spread his condition through bites. As the infection spread throughout South Park, the boys realized that only by destroying the original zombie could they hope to end the epidemic. Kyle's solution involved a chainsaw, which he used to bisect Kenny's reanimated corpse in a shower of gore and mechanical fury. The chainsaw death represented several significant developments in Kenny's mythology. The supernatural resurrection introduced questions about the nature of death itself and Kenny's apparent immunity to its permanence. The violent method of his second death within the same episode suggested that destroying Kenny might require extraordinary measures. Most importantly, the episode established that Kenny's deaths could serve larger narrative purposes beyond simple shock value or comedic timing. These early deaths collectively established the fundamental rules governing Kenny's existence within the South Park universe. Each demise demonstrated the show's commitment to pushing boundaries while maintaining a careful balance between horror and humor. The elaborate nature of many deaths suggested careful planning and consideration rather than random violence, indicating that Kenny's role as the perpetual victim served specific creative and thematic purposes. The pattern of increasingly complex deaths also revealed the writer's awareness of audience expectations and their determination to continually exceed them. Each new episode brought the challenge of creating a death that would surprise viewers who had grown accustomed to Kenny's fate. This pressure drove constant innovation in methods, settings, and circumstances, ensuring that Kenny's deaths remained fresh and shocking rather than becoming routine or predictable. The casual acceptance of Kenny's deaths by his friends and family introduced questions about memory, trauma, and the nature of reality itself. The fact that each episode began with Kenny alive and well, despite his graphic demise in the previous installment, suggested either supernatural intervention or a fundamental disconnect between the audience's perception and the character's reality. This ambiguity would become one of the show's most enduring mysteries, generating countless theories and discussions among fans. The early deaths also established Kenny's role as a barometer for the show's willingness to tackle controversial subjects. His demises often coincided with episodes addressing sensitive topics such as violence, death, religion, and social issues. The juxtaposition of serious themes with absurd deaths created a unique tone that allowed the show to explore difficult subjects while maintaining its comedic identity. As these foundational episodes concluded, Kenny McCormick had transformed from a simple cartoon character into a complex symbol representing childhood vulnerability, societal violence, and the arbitrary nature of fate. His deaths served multiple functions simultaneously, providing shock value, dark humor, narrative punctuation, and philosophical commentary. The groundwork laid in these early episodes would support decades of future development. ensuring that Kenny's deaths remained relevant and impactful throughout the show's evolution. The precedent established by these initial deaths demonstrated that Kenny's fate would never be merely incidental to the show's larger purposes. Instead, his demises would continue to serve as vehicles for exploring the darkest aspects of human nature, while somehow maintaining the innocence and optimism that defined childhood friendship. In this way, Kenny McCormick became both victim and symbol, representing the countless ways in which the world threatens those least equipped to defend themselves. As South Park entered its second and third seasons, the writers began developing a more sophisticated understanding of Kenny's death mythology, creating systematic approaches to his destruction that revealed deeper patterns within the chaos. These deaths moved beyond the initial shock value of the early episodes, establishing recurring themes and methodologies that would define Kenny's fate for years to come. The careful categorization of his demises during this period demonstrated a growing awareness of the narrative potential inherent in his unique situation. The phenomenon of crushing deaths emerged as one of the most psychologically disturbing categories of Kenny's demise, primarily due to the inevitable nature of the approaching doom and the helplessness it inspired in both victim and observer. These deaths often unfolded with agonizing slowness, allowing ample time for contemplation of the approaching horror while providing no means of escape or intervention. The episode, Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics, introduced the archetypal chandelier death, a scenario that would become emblematic of Kenny's relationship with gravity and architectural hazards. During the community's festive celebration, as voices joined together in seasonal harmony, the ornate lighting fixture hanging above the assembled crowd began to show signs of structural weakness. The mounting tension of creaking chains and shifting crystal created an atmosphere of impending catastrophe that contrasted sharply with the joyful caroling below. When the inevitable failure occurred, the massive chandelier plummeted with devastating force, its trajectory precisely calculated to intersect with Kenny's position. The impact demonstrated the crushing power of decorative objects transformed into instruments of destruction, while the timing of the collapse during a moment of communal celebration added layers of irony to an already tragic situation. The juxtaposition of Christmas cheer and violent death encapsulated the show's ability to find darkness within the most innocent contexts. The evolution of crushing deaths reached new heights of mechanical precision in Something You Can Do With Your Finger, where Kenny encountered the inexorable descent of an elevator, unlike the sudden collapse of the chandelier. This death unfolded with torturous deliberation, each moment bringing the descending platform closer to its inevitable conclusion. Kenny's awareness of his approaching fate, combined with his inability to escape the confined space, created a scenario reminiscent of Edgar Allan Poe's most claustrophobic nightmares. The elevator's mechanical nature emphasized humanity's relationship with technology and the ways in which our own creations can become agents of destruction. The slow, methodical descent of the platform suggested the grinding inevitability of industrial machinery, indifferent to human life and incapable of mercy or hesitation. Kenny's position beneath this mechanical executioner highlighted his vulnerability in a world increasingly dominated by complex systems beyond individual control or understanding. Perhaps the most elaborate crushing death occurred in prehistoric Iceman, where Kenny's encounter with a conveyor belt system demonstrated the show's fascination with industrial accidents and mechanical hazards. The automated machinery that caught Kenny in its mechanical embrace represented the ultimate expression of technological indifference to human welfare. The conveyor belt's relentless motion carried him through a crushing mechanism designed for processing materials far more durable than human bone and flesh. The aftermath of this industrial accident proved equally disturbing. As Kenny emerged from the machinery flattened to an impossible thinness, yet somehow still recognizable, the belt continued its mechanical operation, carrying his compressed form along its predetermined path as if nothing unusual had occurred. This image of Kenny, reduced to a pancake-like state, while remaining trapped within the system that destroyed him, served as a powerful metaphor for the dehumanizing effects of industrialization and mechanization. The transportation deaths that characterized this period revealed Kenny's particularly toxic relationship with vehicles of all descriptions, from the smallest motorcycle to the largest locomotive. These deaths demonstrated how modern conveniences and transportation methods could transform into instruments of destruction with minimal provocation or warning. The motorcycle incident in How to Eat with Your Butt established the template for vehicular deaths through its emphasis on sudden, unexpected impact. Kenny and Cartman's attempt to cross a seemingly quiet street transformed into tragedy when a motorcycle materialized from nowhere, striking Kenny with sufficient force to flatten his small frame against the asphalt. The speed of the impact left no time for evasion or protective measures, emphasizing the vulnerability of pedestrians in a world designed for mechanical transportation. The aftermath of the motorcycle collision revealed the show's willingness to linger on the consequences of vehicular violence, as Kenny's flattened form remained visible on the street, while his friends processed the sudden transformation of their companion into roadkill. Cartman's laughter at Kenny's misfortune highlighted the casual cruelty that often accompanied these deaths, suggesting that even close friends had become desensitized to Kenny's repeated demises. The escalation from motorcycles to automobiles occurred in A Very Crappy Christmas, where the boys' attempt to film their holiday special led to another street crossing disaster. The similarities between this death and the previous motorcycle incident demonstrated the show's awareness of recurring patterns while introducing subtle variations that prevented the deaths from becoming entirely predictable. The car's impact created a more substantial blood smear than the motorcycle, suggesting that larger vehicles produced correspondingly more dramatic results. The most psychologically complex vehicular death involved an ambulance in Cartman Joins Nambla, where the very vehicle designed to preserve life became an agent of destruction. As Stuart McCormick received medical attention, the ambulance driver's decision to reverse without checking for obstacles transformed a rescue operation into an execution. The The sight of an ambulance crushing Kenny while his parents watched from nearby added layers of tragic irony that elevated this death beyond simple slapstick comedy. The ultimate expression of transportation-based destruction occurred in Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, where Kenny's encounter with a runaway go-kart culminated in a collision with a locomotive. The elaborate sequence began with Kenny's attempt to repair the boy's racing vehicle, a mechanical challenge that required him to position himself in various vulnerable locations around the cart. When the repairs proved successful, the vehicle's sudden acceleration caught Kenny unprepared, dragging him behind the cart as it gained momentum down a steep incline. The journey transformed from inconvenience to nightmare as the cart struck numerous obstacles, each impact adding to Kenny's accumulating injuries while preventing his escape from the mechanical beast that held him captive. The cart's eventual arrival at a railroad crossing represented the convergence of multiple transportation systems, with the approaching train serving as the final element in an elaborate death machine spanning several city blocks. The locomotive's arrival demonstrated the ultimate expression of vehicular mass and momentum. Its enormous weight and unstoppable inertia, reducing Kenny to nothing more than a crimson stain on the railroad tracks. The train's inability to stop or swerve emphasized the helplessness of individuals when confronted with the full force of industrial transportation systems operating according to their predetermined schedules and routes. Environmental hazards during this period revealed Kenny's susceptibility to the very elements that sustained life, with water serving as both life-giving necessity and deadly threat, depending upon circumstances and concentration. These drowning deaths explored themes of contamination, immersion, and the transformation of beneficial substances into agents of destruction. The episode Super Best Friends introduced the concept of voluntary drowning. Through Kenny's participation in David Blaine's cult activities, the mass suicide scenario demonstrated how external manipulation could transform Kenny's natural survival instincts into self-destructive behavior, with the cult leader's influence proving more powerful than Kenny's inherent desire to continue living. The Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool served as an ironic location for this death, transforming a symbol of American democracy and freedom into a site of mass destruction. The chlorinated water of the memorial pool represented the sanitized nature of American civic spaces, with its artificial cleanliness masking the potential for violence and death that lurked beneath the surface of organized society. Kenny's willing participation in his own drowning highlighted the power of charismatic leadership to override rational self-preservation, while the public nature of the location emphasized how destructive cults could operate within the heart of democratic institutions. The episode P elevated the drowning concept to new levels of disgust and absurdity through Kenny's death in a tidal wave of urine at Pie Pie's Splashtown Water Park. The gradual contamination of the park's water supply created a scenario where recreational bathing transformed into exposure to concentrated human waste, with Kenny's drowning representing the ultimate consequence of inadequate sanitation and corporate negligence. The urine tsunami that claimed Kenny's life served as a scathing commentary on the degradation of public spaces and the willingness of businesses to prioritize profit over customer safety. The image of Kenny's body floating in the yellow flood emphasized the dehumanizing effects of corporate irresponsibility, while transforming a childhood pleasure into a nightmare of contamination and disease. The most elaborate drowning scenario occurred in The Tooth Fairy Tats 2000, where Kenny's involvement in underground tooth fairy economics led to his execution by rival entrepreneur Loogie. The cement shoes method of assassination borrowed from organized crime mythology, suggesting that even elementary school business ventures could adopt the brutal practices of adult criminal enterprises. Kenny's struggle to escape the concrete restraints that bound his feet demonstrated the futile nature of resistance against carefully planned execution methods, while his eventual drowning in the shallow river revealed how even inadequate water sources could become deadly when combined with proper restraining techniques. The gangster-style execution of a fourth grader highlighted the show's ability to apply adult themes to childhood scenarios, creating uncomfortable juxtapositions that challenged viewers' assumptions about innocence and corruption. The systematic development of these death categories during the second and third seasons revealed the writers' growing sophistication in their approach to Kenny's demise, transforming what had begun as simple shock humor into complex explorations of violence, technology, and social dysfunction. Each death served multiple narrative purposes while contributing to an evolving mythology that would continue to develop throughout the series' run. The careful categorization of crushing, transportation, and drowning deaths demonstrated how Kenny's fate had become a vehicle for examining broader social issues, from industrial safety to corporate responsibility, to the influence of charismatic leaders on vulnerable populations. These deaths transformed Kenny from a simple victim into a complex symbol of societal failure and institutional negligence, while maintaining the dark humor that made such serious topics accessible to audiences seeking entertainment rather than education. The progression into South Park's fourth through sixth seasons marked a significant evolution in Kenny's death mythology as the show began exploring more deliberate forms of violence and their relationship to contemporary social anxieties. These deaths moved beyond the accidental and environmental hazards of previous seasons to examine humanity's capacity for intentional harm, whether through negligence, misunderstanding, or calculated malice. The weapons that claimed Kenny's life during this period reflected both ancient methods of destruction and modern innovations in violence, creating a comprehensive survey of mankind's relationship with tools of death. The emergence of gunshot deaths during this era coincided with growing national concerns about firearms, violence, and the proliferation of weapons in American society. These deaths demonstrated how easily tools designed for protection, hunting, and recreation could transform into instruments of destruction when combined with human error, institutional failure, or simple misfortune. The archetypal hunting accident occurred in Damien, where Uncle Jimbo's encounter with Kenny's magically transformed state created a perfect storm of supernatural circumstance and human negligence. When the demonic influence of Satan's son changed Kenny into a duck-billed platypus. His transformation created an irresistible target for Jimbo's hunting instincts. The experienced outdoorsman's immediate response to encountering such a rare and exotic creature revealed the reflexive violence that hunting culture had embedded in his psychology. The dual gunshot wounds that ended Kinney's platypus existence demonstrated the thoroughness with which trained marksmen approached their task, ensuring that their quarry would not escape or suffer unnecessarily. The clinical precision of the shots, combined with the subsequent decapitation, revealed how hunting practices prioritized efficiency and finality over any consideration of the target's potential sentience or value. The fact that Kinney retained his human consciousness while trapped in the platypus form added layers of psychological horror to what might otherwise be viewed as a simple case of mistaken identity. The institutional violence represented by law enforcement agencies reached its pinnacle in the entity where Kinney's encounter with post-September 11th security measures demonstrated how fear and bureaucracy could combine to create lethal consequences from the most mundane interactions. The Transportation Security Administration agent's discovery of nail clippers in Kinney's luggage triggered a response entirely disproportionate to the perceived threat, transforming a routine security screening into a summary execution. The single gunshot to Kinney's head represented the ultimate expression of institutional paranoia and the willingness of security apparatus to employ lethal force against perceived threats, regardless of their actual danger level. The nail clippers that prompted this violent response highlighted the absurdity of security theater and the ways in which protective measures could become more dangerous than the threats they purported to address. Kinney's death served as a darkly prophetic commentary on the erosion of civil liberties and the normalization of state violence in the name of public safety. The concept of collateral damage found its most poignant expression in The List, where Kinney's death resulted from violence directed at entirely different targets. As Wendy and Stan fled from Bebe's pursuit, the gunfire intended to stop their escape instead found an unintended victim in Kenny, who was peacefully enjoying his dinner at home when the ricocheting bullet penetrated his skull. The domestic setting of his death emphasized how violence could intrude into the most private and secure spaces, transforming family mealtime into a scene of sudden tragedy. The randomness of the bullet's path through the neighborhood demonstrated the unpredictable nature of firearms violence and the impossibility of containing its effects to intended targets. Kenny's complete innocence of the conflict that claimed his life highlighted the arbitrary nature of violence and the ways in which innocent bystanders could become casualties of disputes entirely unrelated to their own lives. The image of a child struck down while eating dinner served as a powerful indictment of a society where gunfire had become so commonplace that homes no longer provided sanctuary from its effects. The escalation to military-grade violence occurred in quintuplets 2000, where Kenny's exposure to automatic weapons fire demonstrated the devastating potential of firearms designed for warfare rather than civilian use. The accidental discharge of an agent's automatic weapon filled Kenny's body with numerous bullet holes, transforming him from a living child into a grotesque demonstration of military firepower's impact on human flesh. The sheer volume of ammunition that struck Kenny's small frame exceeded any rational requirement for stopping a perceived threat, suggesting that the weapons themselves encouraged excessive force through their rapid rate of fire and large magazine capacity. The government agent's inability to control his weapon highlighted the inadequate training and preparation of those entrusted with such devastating tools, while Kenny's perforated corpse served as evidence of what occurred when military weapons entered civilian contexts. The ultimate expression of firearms violence occurred in Merry Christmas, Charlie Manson, where Kenny's encounter with law enforcement's response to a hostage situation demonstrated how police procedures could prioritize force over careful assessment of circumstances. When Charles Manson sent Kenny out with a white flag of surrender, the police response revealed their complete disregard for traditional rules of engagement and diplomatic protocols. The massive fusillade that greeted Kenny's appearance transformed a peaceful surrender into a massacre, with dozens of officers firing simultaneously to ensure that no possible threat could survive their coordinated response. The white flag that Kenny carried, a universally recognized symbol of non-combatant status and peaceful intent, proved entirely ineffective against the overwhelming firepower directed toward him. His death represented the complete breakdown of civilized restraint and the triumph of violent paranoia over rational assessment of actual threats. Sharp objects and impalement deaths during this period explored humanity's oldest methods of violence, while examining how tools designed for construction, food preparation, and daily life could become instruments of destruction. These deaths demonstrated the intimate nature of blade violence and the precision required to achieve lethal results through puncturing and cutting. The classroom impalement in Tom's rhinoplasty revealed how educational environments, supposedly safe spaces for learning and growth, could become scenes of sudden violence when adult conflicts intruded into children's lives. The Iraqi sword that flew across the classroom represented the intrusion of international political violence into the most domestic and protected spaces, transforming a routine school day into a scene from a war zone. The trajectory of the blade that pinned Kenny to the classroom wall demonstrated the deadly precision that could result from desperate combat, even when such precision was entirely accidental. The sword's passage through Kenny's face before embedding in the wall behind him created a grotesque display that combined the medieval brutality of blade warfare with the modern setting of public education. The image of a child impaled by an ancient weapon in a contemporary classroom served as a powerful metaphor for the ways in which historical violence continued to intrude into modern life. The bull riding incident in Cow Days introduced the concept of animal-mediated impalement, where Kenny's death resulted from livestock transformed into an instrument of violence through human intervention and manipulation. The bull's horns, natural defensive weapons evolved over millennia, became agents of human destruction when the animal's instincts were deliberately provoked for entertainment purposes. Kenny's impalement on the bull's horns demonstrated how supposedly controlled entertainment could become deadly when safety measures proved inadequate to contain the raw power of frightened animals. The rodeo setting emphasized the American tradition of transforming potentially lethal activities into spectacle, while Kinney's death revealed the true cost of such entertainment when safety protocols failed to protect participants and spectators alike. The self-sacrifice impalement in Coon versus Coon and Friends represented a unique development in Kenny's death mythology, as this marked one of the few occasions where he deliberately chose his own method of destruction. The pit of metal spikes that claimed his life served as an appropriate metaphor for the painful nature of heroic sacrifice, while Kenny's conscious decision to embrace such agony demonstrated his growing awareness of his unique relationship with death and resurrection. The multiple puncture wounds that covered Kenny's body after his leap into the spike pit created a visual representation of the ultimate price of heroism, transforming his small frame into a testament to the physical cost of moral courage. His complaints about the pain he experienced highlighted the reality that even supernatural resurrection could not eliminate the suffering inherent in violent death, adding psychological depth to what might otherwise be viewed as a simple reset mechanism. Explosive deaths during this period demonstrated humanity's mastery of chemistry and physics in service of destruction, while exploring how scientific knowledge could create devastation far beyond the capacity of individual human strength. These deaths revealed the awesome power contained within chemical reactions and the ease with which such power could be unleashed with catastrophic results. The fireworks accident in Summer Sucks, presented through flashback to the boy's earlier childhood, demonstrated how celebrations and joy could transform into tragedy when combined with insufficient supervision and inadequate safety measures. The prolonged contact between Kenny's small hands and the explosive device created a scenario where festive celebration became deadly spectacle, transforming Independence Day joy into premature funeral arrangements. The dismemberment that resulted from the fireworks' delayed detonation highlighted the particular vulnerability of children to explosive devices designed and manufactured with adult users in mind. Kenny's inability to release the device in time emphasized how children's slower reflexes and limited understanding of danger could prove fatal when combined with adult tools and adult celebrations that failed to account for youthful participation. The chemical explosion in Shefko's nanners introduced the concept of accidental chemical warfare, where Kenny's consumption of antacid tablets created a deadly reaction when combined with water. The expanding foam that filled his body from within demonstrated how household products could become lethal weapons when misused or consumed in quantities beyond their intended application. The internal pressure that built within Kenny's body before his explosive rupture created a grotesque demonstration of chemical principles applied to human physiology, transforming basic chemistry into a lesson about the fragility of biological systems when exposed to uncontrolled chemical reactions. The white foam that expelled from Kenny's exploding form served as a visual representation of the violence inherent in uncontrolled chemical processes, while his friend's appreciation for the spectacle highlighted society's fascination with destruction, even when it claimed innocent victims. The laser disintegration in It's Christmas in Canada represented the ultimate fusion of science fiction speculation and explosive destruction, as Kinney's encounter with futuristic weaponry demonstrated how technological advancement could exponentially increase humanity's capacity for violence. The Canadian Prime Minister's laser weapon transformed Kinney from solid matter into bloody particles, showcasing the potential for future weapons to eliminate not just life, but the very physical evidence of life's previous existence. The complete atomization of Kinney's body through laser energy created a death that transcended traditional concepts of destruction, moving beyond mere killing into the realm of existential elimination. The bloody rain that resulted from his disintegration served as the only remaining evidence of his former existence, transforming a living child into atmospheric precipitation through the application of concentrated energy. This death represented the logical endpoint of humanity's weapons development, where the tools of destruction had evolved beyond the need for physical contact or projectile impact into pure energy conversion of living matter into component particles. These weapons-based deaths collectively demonstrated the show's growing sophistication in addressing contemporary anxieties about violence, technology, and institutional failure. Each death served as both entertainment and commentary, using Kinney's repeated demise to explore serious social issues while maintaining the dark humor that made such exploration palatable to audiences seeking diversion rather than education. The escalation from simple accidents to deliberate violence reflected both the show's maturation and society's increasing comfort with extreme imagery and themes, creating a feedback loop where fictional violence both reflected and influenced cultural attitudes toward real violence. The transition into South Park's 7th through 10th seasons marked a profound evolution in Kinney's death mythology as the show began exploring supernatural and cosmic forces that transcended the mundane violence of previous episodes. These deaths introduced elements of religious mysticism, science fiction speculation, and horror movie tributes that elevated Kinney's demise from earthly accident to cosmic inevitability. The supernatural deaths during this period suggested that Kinney's fate was governed by forces far beyond human understanding or control, transforming him from a victim of random violence into a pawn of supernatural entities and cosmic horror. Religious and mythological deaths during this era demonstrated the show's willingness to engage with spiritual themes while maintaining its characteristic irreverence toward organized religion and sacred traditions. These deaths explored the intersection between divine intervention and personal sacrifice, often positioning Kinney as an unwitting participant in cosmic conflicts that dwarfed human comprehension. The Moses conch shell sacrifice in Jubilee represented one of Kinney's most heroic deaths, as his deliberate self-sacrifice to release the trapped spiritual leader demonstrated a level of conscious heroism rarely seen in his previous demises. The ancient conch shell that imprisoned Moses served as a tangible link between contemporary events and biblical mythology, suggesting that supernatural forces continued to operate within the modern world despite humanity's growing secularization. and technological advancement. Kenny's decision to ram his head repeatedly against the conch shell until the impact proved fatal revealed a level of determination and self-awareness that transcended his usual role as accidental victim. The physical pain he endured during this process, combined with his knowledge that death was the likely outcome, transformed this demise into a genuine act of martyrdom rather than mere misfortune. The liberation of Moses that resulted from Kinney's sacrifice demonstrated that his death could serve purposes beyond simple shock value or comedic timing, contributing to the resolution of supernatural crises that threatened entire communities. The religious implications of Kinney's sacrifice resonated beyond the immediate narrative context, suggesting parallels between his repeated deaths and resurrection and various religious traditions that celebrated similar cycles of death and rebirth. The voluntary nature of this particular death elevated Kenny from passive victim to active participant in cosmic events, hinting at a deeper understanding of his unique relationship with mortality that would later become central to his character development. The encounter with Satan and various demonic entities throughout multiple episodes positioned Kenny as a recurring figure in cosmic battles between good and evil, often serving as an unwitting catalyst for supernatural events that reshaped the metaphysical landscape of South Park. These deaths demonstrated how Kenny's unique relationship with mortality made him valuable to supernatural forces seeking to manipulate the boundary between life and death for their own purposes. The Halloween episodes that featured Kenny's encounters with genuine supernatural threats revealed how his deaths could serve as gateways for otherworldly entities to enter the mortal realm. His repeated resurrections created temporal and spiritual instabilities that various supernatural forces sought to exploit, transforming Kenny from a simple victim into a cosmic anomaly whose very existence threatened the natural order of life and death. Science fiction deaths during this period explored the intersection between advanced technology and human mortality, often featuring Kenny as an unwitting test subject for experimental procedures or futuristic weaponry that exceeded contemporary scientific understanding. These deaths demonstrated how technological advancement could create new categories of violence and destruction while maintaining the fundamental vulnerability that characterized Kenny's relationship with the physical world. The time travel experiments that occasionally claimed Kenny's life revealed the dangerous potential of attempting to manipulate temporal mechanics without adequate understanding of their consequences. When Kenny became caught in temporal paradoxes or dimensional rifts, his deaths served as cautionary tales about the hubris of scientific advancement and the unintended consequences of attempting to transcend natural limitations through technological innovation. The various genetic mutations and scientific accidents that transformed Kenny into different forms before ultimately killing him demonstrated how scientific experimentation could violate the fundamental principles of biological integrity. These transformations often involved Kenny being subjected to experimental procedures that treated him as expendable research material, highlighting the ethical failures of scientific institutions that prioritized advancement over individual welfare. The alien encounters that periodically claimed Kenny's life suggested that his unique relationship with death and resurrection had attracted attention from extraterrestrial entities seeking to understand or exploit his supernatural abilities. These cosmic visitors often viewed Kenny as a fascinating anomaly worthy of study or experimentation, leading to deaths that combined the clinical detachment of scientific research with the overwhelming technological superiority of advanced alien civilizations. Horror movie tributes during this era demonstrated the show's deep appreciation for classic horror cinema while using Kenny's deaths to explore the psychological themes that made such films enduringly popular. These deaths often recreated iconic moments from horror movie history, while adapting them to South Park's unique sensibilities and contemporary concerns. The zombie apocalypse scenarios that occasionally engulfed South Park typically featured Kenny as either the first victim or the original source of the outbreak, suggesting that his unique relationship with death made him particularly susceptible to supernatural infections that blurred the line between life and death. When Kenny became patient zero for zombie epidemics, his deaths served multiple narrative functions simultaneously, providing both the inciting incident for the horror scenario and the key to its eventual resolution. The monster attacks that claimed Kenny's life during horror-themed episodes often featured creatures that represented specific psychological fears or social anxieties, with Kenny serving as the innocent victim, whose destruction demonstrated the monster's power and malevolence. These deaths explored themes of helplessness, inevitability, and the failure of protective institutions to shield the vulnerable from supernatural threats that exceeded human understanding or defensive capability. The supernatural possession scenarios that occasionally claimed Kenny's life revealed how his unique spiritual situation made him vulnerable to otherworldly entities seeking physical forms through which to manifest in the mortal realm. When demons, spirits, or other supernatural beings attempted to use Kenny as a vessel for their earthly activities, the resulting conflicts often proved fatal to his human form, while serving the narrative function of introducing supernatural elements into otherwise mundane situations. The recurring theme of Kenny as a cosmic plaything became increasingly prominent during this period, as various supernatural entities began recognizing his unique relationship with death and resurrection as a source of entertainment or experimentation. These cosmic forces often treated Kenny's repeated deaths as amusing diversions or valuable research opportunities, transforming his suffering into spectacle for beings whose immortal perspectives rendered human mortality insignificant. The Cthulhu mythology that began emerging during this era positioned Kenny within a framework of cosmic horror that dwarfed human understanding and rendered individual mortality meaningless within the context of eternal cosmic cycles. When Kenny encountered entities operating on geological or astronomical timescales, his deaths served to demonstrate the absolute insignificance of human life when measured against cosmic forces that predated civilization and would continue long after humanity's extinction. The various cosmic entities that took interest in Kenny's situation often viewed his repeated deaths and resurrections as violations of natural law that required investigation or correction. These supernatural interventions typically resulted in Kenny's death through methods that combined cosmic power with casual indifference, suggesting that even benevolent cosmic forces could prove lethal to humans simply through the overwhelming scale of their existence and operations. The gradual revelation that Kenny's deaths and resurrections were connected to ancient cosmic forces operating beyond human comprehension transformed his character from a simple victim of random violence into a central figure in supernatural conflicts that spanned multiple dimensions and temporal periods. This evolution prepared the groundwork for later episodes that would explicitly address the supernatural mechanics underlying Kenny's unique situation while maintaining the mystery and horror that made such revelations compelling. The supernatural deaths of this era collectively demonstrated how Kenny's fate had become intertwined with forces operating on scales that rendered human agency and understanding irrelevant, whether through religious sacrifice, scientific experimentation, horror movie scenarios, or cosmic intervention. These deaths revealed Kenny as a figure whose significance transcended his apparent role as a simple victim of random violence. The supernatural elements that began defining his deaths during this period established the foundation for later revelations about the true nature of his curse and its connection to cosmic forces that had been manipulating his fate since birth. These cosmic and supernatural deaths marked a turning point in Kenny's mythology, transforming him from a victim of earthly violence into a participant in cosmic conflicts that would eventually provide explanations for his unique relationship with mortality. The gradual shift from mundane accidents to supernatural inevitability prepared audiences for the eventual revelation that Kenny's deaths were not random occurrences, but carefully orchestrated events serving purposes that exceeded human understanding or control. The 5th season episode, titled Kenny Dies, represented perhaps the most significant disruption to South Park's established mythology since the show's inception, as the creators made the unprecedented decision to permanently remove Kenny McCormick from the series through a death that carried genuine emotional weight rather than comedic shock value. This departure from the established pattern of Kenny's casual deaths and unexplained resurrections marked a bold experiment in narrative storytelling that would fundamentally alter the show's dynamic, while testing both the creator's commitment to change and the audience's attachment to familiar formulas. The diagnosis of muscular dystrophy that claimed Kenny's life differed dramatically from the violent, sudden deaths that had previously characterized his demise. Instead of the spectacular accidents, weapons, or supernatural forces that typically ended his existence, Kenny faced a slow, inevitable decline that mirrored the real-world experience of terminal illness. The medical nature of his condition stripped away the dark humor and cartoon violence that had previously made his deaths palatable, replacing them with the genuine tragedy of a child facing mortality through natural causes. The progression of Kenny's illness unfolded over the course of the episode with medical realism that contrasted sharply with the show's typical approach to death and suffering. As Kenny's physical condition deteriorated, viewers witnessed the gradual erosion of his strength and vitality, processes that could not be resolved through cartoon logic or supernatural intervention. The hospital setting that dominated the episode emphasized the clinical reality of terminal illness while providing a stark contrast to the elaborate death scenarios that had previously claimed Kenny's life. Stan's emotional response to Kenny's condition revealed depths of friendship and caring that had been largely absent from the boy's reactions to Kenny's previous deaths. The tears and genuine grief that Stan displayed throughout the episode demonstrated that Kenny's friends possessed the capacity for deep emotional connection despite their apparent indifference to his repeated demises in previous episodes. This emotional authenticity suggested that the casual dismissal of Kenny's deaths in earlier episodes might have been a defense mechanism rather than genuine callousness. The hospital scenes that chronicled Kenny's decline provided opportunities for character development and emotional exploration that the show had rarely attempted in previous episodes. The conversations between Kenny and his friends, conducted through the barrier of medical equipment and institutional protocol, revealed the genuine affection and mutual respect that existed beneath the surface of their typical childhood interactions. These moments of tenderness and vulnerability contrasted dramatically with the crude humor and casual violence that typically characterized the boys' relationships. Cartman's subplot involving stem cell research created a parallel narrative that explored contemporary bioethical controversies while providing comic relief from the primary storyline's emotional intensity. The juxtaposition of Cartman's mercenary approach to scientific advancement with Kenny's genuine medical crisis highlighted the complex moral landscape surrounding end-of-life care and medical research. The irony of Cartman profiting from the same type of research that might have saved Kenny's life added layers of dark humor to an otherwise somber episode. The decision to remove Kenny permanently from the series represented a significant creative risk that challenged fundamental assumptions about the show's format and identity. For 4 complete seasons, Kenny's death had served as a reliable source of shock, humor, and narrative punctuation, providing writers with a dependable mechanism for ending episodes and surprising audiences. His removal eliminated this safety net while forcing the creative team to develop new approaches to comedy and storytelling that did not depend upon his repeated demise. The replacement era that followed Kenny's departure introduced audiences to alternative character dynamics while testing the show's ability to maintain its essential identity without one of its core elements. The promotion of secondary characters like Tweak Tweak and Butters Stotch to primary roles demonstrated the rich supporting cast that the show had developed over its first 4 seasons, while providing opportunities for fresh comedic situations and character development. Tweak's anxiety-driven personality and caffeine addiction created new opportunities for physical comedy and social commentary, while filling some of the narrative space previously occupied by Kenny's deaths. His paranoid worldview and hyperactive behavior provided different types of comedic situations that relied more heavily on dialogue and character interaction rather than visual spectacle and violent imagery. The contrast between Tweak's verbal expressiveness and Kenny's muffled speech patterns highlighted how Kenny's communication difficulties had shaped the group's dynamics in subtle but significant ways. Butters' innocent worldview and trusting nature offered another alternative to Kenny's role within the group, while providing opportunities for comedy based on naivety rather than mortality. His genuine sweetness and optimism created situations where the other boys' cynicism and cruelty appeared more pronounced by contrast, adding new dimensions to their characterization while maintaining the show's satirical edge. The protection that Butters required due to his innocence replaced some of the protective instincts that the boys had occasionally shown toward Kenny. The absence of Kenny's death running gag forced writers to develop new methods for ending episodes and providing climactic moments without relying on spectacular violence or supernatural resurrection. This creative constraint encouraged more sophisticated storytelling techniques while demonstrating that the show's humor could survive without depending exclusively on shock value and transgressive imagery. The episodes during Kenny's absence often featured more complex plots and character development as writers filled the narrative space previously occupied by death sequences and their aftermath. Fan reaction to Kenny's permanent removal revealed the deep attachment that audiences had developed to the character, despite his limited dialogue and frequent demise. The outcry that followed the Kenny Dies episode demonstrated that viewers had invested significant emotional energy in Kenny's fate, even when his deaths had been treated as comedic rather than tragic. This response suggested that the casual nature of Kenny's previous deaths had not diminished audience affection for the character, but had instead created a sense of security based on the assumption that his deaths would never be permanent. The letter-writing campaigns and online petitions that emerged during Kenny's absence revealed how deeply the death and resurrection cycle had become embedded in fan expectations about the show's format and mythology. Many viewers expressed feeling that South Park without Kenny was fundamentally incomplete, lacking an essential element that had helped define the show's identity and appeal. The passionate response to his absence demonstrated that even elements of a show that might appear dispensable could become central to audience engagement and satisfaction. The gradual hints about Kenny's possible return began appearing in subsequent episodes as the creators tested various approaches to reintegrating the character while maintaining the emotional impact of his departure. These subtle references and background appearances suggested that the permanent removal of Kenny might not be as final as initially indicated, while building anticipation for his eventual resurrection. The careful pacing of these hints demonstrated the creator's awareness that Kenny's return needed to feel earned rather than arbitrary. The mystery surrounding the mechanics of Kenny's eventual return became a source of speculation and analysis among fans who attempted to understand how the show would reconcile his permanent death with the supernatural elements that had previously governed his resurrections. The lack of explicit explanation for his survival of muscular dystrophy when he eventually returned created new layers of mythology while maintaining the ambiguity that had always surrounded his unique relationship with mortality. The Kenny Dies experiment ultimately demonstrated both the show's willingness to take creative risks and the fundamental importance of Kenny's character to South Park's identity and appeal. While the temporary removal allowed for character development and narrative experimentation, the overwhelming fan response and eventual return of the character confirmed that some elements of a fictional universe become so central to its identity that their removal fundamentally alters the work's essential nature. The episode served as both a genuine exploration of childhood mortality and a test of the show's ability to evolve beyond its established formulas, while maintaining the elements that made it distinctive and compelling. The transformation of Kenny McCormick into the superhero Mysterion during South Park's 12th through 14th seasons represented a watershed moment in the show's mythology, as the creators finally began providing explicit explanations for the supernatural circumstances that had governed Kenny's repeated deaths and resurrections throughout the series' run. This revelation emerged through a trilogy of episodes that combined superhero parody with cosmic horror elements, creating a narrative framework that retroactively explained years of mysterious occurrences while introducing new layers of complexity to Kenny's character and circumstances. The initial appearance of Mysterion in the Coon marked the beginning of Kenny's evolution from passive victim to active participant in his own supernatural destiny. The purple hood and cape that concealed his identity while echoing his traditional orange parka created visual continuity between Kenny's civilian and superhero personas, while establishing Mysterion as a figure of mystery and competence rather than perpetual victimhood. The tactical gear and professional demeanor that Mysterion displayed contrasted dramatically with Kenny's typical vulnerability, suggesting that his repeated encounters with death had provided him with unique insights into mortality and danger that translated into exceptional heroic capabilities. The investigation skills and detective work that Mysterion demonstrated throughout his appearances revealed intellectual capabilities that Kenny had never been able to display due to his muffled speech and limited dialogue in previous episodes. His ability to uncover complex conspiracies and understand criminal psychology suggested that his repeated deaths had provided him with perspectives on human nature and motivation that exceeded those of his peers. The mature worldview that Mysterion exhibited stood in stark contrast to the childish concerns and limited understanding that typically characterized the fourth grade protagonists. The revelation of Kenny's identity as Mysterion occurred in Mysterion Rises, the first episode of the Cthulhu trilogy that would fundamentally reshape understanding of his supernatural situation. The moment when Kenny removed his purple hood to reveal his familiar orange parka created a visual bridge between his heroic and civilian identities, while confirming fan theories that had circulated since Mysterion's first appearance. The casual manner in which he revealed his identity to his friends suggested that Kenny had grown comfortable with his unique circumstances and was ready to discuss them openly, rather than maintaining the secrecy that had previously surrounded his deaths and resurrections. The explanation that Kenny provided for his immortality introduced cosmic horror elements that dwarfed the simple cartoon violence of his previous deaths, positioning his fate within a framework of ancient entities and otherworldly forces that operated according to logic beyond human comprehension. The revelation that his parents had participated in cult activities dedicated to Cthulhu provided a genealogical explanation for Kenny's supernatural circumstances, while suggesting that his curse had been deliberately imposed rather than randomly acquired. The cosmic scale of the forces involved in Kenny's situation elevated his character from local oddity to participant in universal conflicts that spanned dimensions and geological epochs. The cult of Cthulhu that served as the primary antagonist throughout the trilogy represented the ultimate expression of cosmic horror themes that had been gradually building throughout Kenny's death mythology. The ancient entity whose influence extended across time and space operated according to motivations and objectives that transcended human understanding, treating Kenny's repeated deaths as minor incidents within larger cosmic purposes. The cultists who served Cthulhu demonstrated the corrupting influence of cosmic knowledge. Their human concerns subsumed by devotion to entities whose existence rendered terrestrial life insignificant. The family secrets that emerged during Kenny's revelations about his immortality provided new context for understanding the poverty and dysfunction that had always characterized the McCormick household. The discovery that Kenny's parents had knowingly participated in supernatural activities that cursed their son with eternal death and resurrection added layers of tragedy to their apparent neglect and indifference. The burden of knowledge that Kenny's family carried about his condition, combined with their inability to break the cosmic forces that controlled his fate, transformed their poverty from simple economic hardship into a form of supernatural punishment. Stuart and Carol McCormick's participation in the Cthulhu cult revealed the desperate circumstances that had driven them to seek supernatural solutions to their earthly problems, while demonstrating how such involvement inevitably led to consequences that exceeded their ability to understand or control. The revelation that they had attended cult meetings as young adults, seeking answers to problems that conventional society could not address, provided sympathetic context for their decision, while highlighting the tragic results of their supernatural involvement. Their helplessness in the face of Kenny's curse demonstrated how cosmic forces rendered human agency meaningless when confronted with the vast scales of otherworldly influence. Karen McCormick's awareness of her brother's condition added another dimension to the family's supernatural burden, as Kenny's younger sister had grown up understanding that death held no permanent meaning within their household. Her casual acceptance of Kenny's repeated deaths and resurrections suggested that the McCormick children had been raised with fundamentally different relationships to mortality than their peers experienced. The protective instincts that Kenny displayed toward Karen throughout the trilogy demonstrated how his unique circumstances had shaped his priorities and values, transforming his repeated deaths from personal tragedy into motivation for heroic action. The psychological implications of Kenny's curse began receiving explicit attention during the Mysterion episodes, as the show finally acknowledged the mental and emotional toll that repeated death and resurrection would impose upon any conscious being. Kenny's matter-of-fact discussion of his deaths revealed a level of psychological adaptation that bordered on dissociation, suggesting that survival of his circumstances required fundamental alterations to normal human responses to mortality and trauma. The casual manner in which he described experiencing various forms of violent death, demonstrated how repeated exposure to terminal events had fundamentally altered his relationship with concepts that terrified ordinary people. The burden of memory that Kinney carried regarding his repeated deaths created a form of isolation that none of his friends could fully comprehend, as their inability to retain memories of his deaths left him alone with the accumulated trauma of countless violent experiences. The episodes revealed that Kinney remembered every detail of every death he had experienced, carrying within his consciousness a catalog of violence and suffering that would have destroyed most individuals. The strength of character required to maintain psychological stability, despite such experiences, elevated Kinney from comic relief character to genuine tragic hero whose suffering served purposes beyond entertainment. The strategic use that Kinney made of his immortality during his Mysterion adventures demonstrated how he had learned to transform his curse into a tactical advantage, using his ability to return from death as a resource for accomplishing heroic objectives that would be impossible for ordinary mortals. His willingness to sacrifice himself repeatedly to protect others revealed how his unique circumstances had instilled in him a form of courage that transcended normal human limitations regarding self-preservation. The casual efficiency with which he employed suicide as a problem-solving tool highlighted how thoroughly his immortality had altered his decision-making processes and risk assessment capabilities. The cosmic horror elements that surrounded Kinney's curse reached their culmination in Coon vs. Coon and Friends, where the full scope of the otherworldly forces controlling his fate became apparent through his encounters with Cthulhu itself. The ancient entity's casual manipulation of reality and indifference to human concerns demonstrated the vast gulf between cosmic perspectives and terrestrial understanding. Kinney's attempts to communicate with Cthulhu revealed the futility of human logic. When confronted with entities operating according to principles that predated civilization and would persist long after humanity's extinction, the revelation that Kinney's deaths and resurrections served larger cosmic purposes beyond his understanding or control transformed his character from victim to unwitting participant in supernatural conflicts that spanned multiple dimensions and temporal periods. The suggestion that his curse had been designed to serve specific functions within cosmic schemes elevated his suffering from random misfortune to deliberate exploitation by forces whose objectives remained incomprehensible to human consciousness. This realization added new layers of tragedy to Kinney's situation while providing explanations for the seemingly random nature of his previous deaths. The friendship bonds that sustained Kinney throughout his supernatural trials demonstrated how human connection could provide meaning and purpose even within the context of cosmic horror and otherworldly manipulation. The loyalty that Stan, Kyle, and even Cartman displayed toward Mysterion revealed that their relationships transcended the casual indifference they showed toward Kinney's deaths in earlier episodes. The revelation that their forgetfulness regarding his deaths was itself a supernatural effect rather than genuine callousness provided new context for understanding their group dynamics and emotional connections. The Mysterion trilogy ultimately established Kenny McCormick as a figure of genuine heroism whose supernatural circumstances had been shaped by cosmic forces operating beyond human comprehension or resistance. The explanations provided for his immortality transformed years of mysterious deaths from simple running gags into elements of a complex mythology that connected Kenny's fate to universal themes of sacrifice, cosmic horror, and the struggle to maintain human dignity within circumstances that transcended normal understanding. The revelation that his curse served purposes beyond entertainment value elevated Kenny from comic relief to tragic hero whose suffering carried meaning within frameworks that exceeded terrestrial concerns, while maintaining the essential humanity that made his struggles relatable and compelling. The progression of South Park into its 15th through 24th seasons marked a significant evolution in Kenny's death mythology, as contemporary technological developments, social movements, and global crises began influencing both the methods and meanings of his demise. These modern deaths reflected the show's continued commitment to cultural commentary, while adapting Kenny's unique circumstances to address current events and emerging social concerns. The deaths during this period demonstrated how timeless themes of mortality and suffering could be recontextualized through contemporary lenses while maintaining the essential elements that had made Kenny's fate compelling throughout. The series' evolution, technology-based deaths during this era reflected society's increasing dependence on digital systems and virtual environments, often featuring Kenny as a victim of humanity's relationship with advanced technology that exceeded individual understanding or control. These deaths explored themes of digital addiction, virtual reality displacement, and the unintended consequences of technological advancement, while maintaining the essential unpredictability that had always characterized Kenny's demise. The emergence of social media-related deaths demonstrated how online platforms and digital communication had created new categories of risk and vulnerability that primarily affected younger demographics. Kenny's encounters with cyberbullying, viral challenges, and social media-driven behavior modifications revealed how digital environments could influence real-world actions with deadly consequences. The disconnect between virtual consequences and physical reality often featured prominently in these deaths, as Kenny's participation in online activities led to offline situations that proved fatal despite their apparent harmlessness within digital contexts. The viral challenge deaths that occasionally claimed Kenny's life reflected contemporary concerns about social media's influence on adolescent decision-making and risk assessment capabilities. When Kenny attempted to replicate dangerous behaviors that had gained popularity through online platforms, his deaths served as cautionary tales about the power of digital peer pressure and the inadequacy of virtual safety measures. The global reach of social media transformed local dangers into worldwide phenomena, with Kenny serving as a representative victim of trends that could claim lives across multiple continents simultaneously. Internet gaming and virtual reality deaths explored the psychological and physiological risks associated with prolonged immersion in digital environments that increasingly resembled reality while lacking its fundamental safety constraints. Kenny's deaths through gaming-related seizures, virtual reality accidents, and extended reality displacement demonstrated how technology designed for entertainment could become dangerous when users lost awareness of the distinction between digital and physical experiences. The addictive properties of gaming environments often contributed to these deaths by encouraging behaviors that prioritized virtual achievements over physical welfare. The medical technology deaths that occurred during this period reflected contemporary anxieties about healthcare automation, pharmaceutical advancement, and the increasing complexity of medical interventions that exceeded individual comprehension. Kenny's encounters with robotic surgery systems, experimental treatments, and automated diagnostic equipment revealed how medical progress could create new categories of risk while attempting to eliminate traditional healthcare dangers. The irony of medical technology causing death rather than preventing it became a recurring theme as Kenny's immortality intersected with humanity's attempts to extend and improve mortal life. Current events commentary through Kenny's deaths during this period demonstrated the show's continued commitment to addressing contemporary social and political issues through his unique circumstances. The deaths that emerged from global crises, political movements, and social upheavals revealed how large-scale events could impact individual lives in unexpected and tragic ways, while maintaining the dark humor that made such commentary accessible to audiences seeking entertainment rather than education. Pandemic-related deaths during the COVID-19 crisis explored themes of public health policy, social isolation, and the unintended consequences of protective measures designed to preserve life. Kenny's deaths, through quarantine-related accidents, social distancing mishaps, and pandemic response protocols, demonstrated how crisis management could create new dangers while attempting to eliminate existing threats. The masks and protective equipment that were designed to preserve life occasionally became instruments of Kenny's destruction, highlighting the ironic potential for safety measures to generate unintended risks. The political violence deaths that occurred during periods of social unrest reflected contemporary concerns about polarization, extremism, and the breakdown of civil discourse in democratic societies. Kenny's involvement in protest-related violence, politically motivated attacks, and ideological conflicts demonstrated how abstract political differences could translate into concrete physical danger for individuals caught between opposing factions. The casual nature of Kenny's participation in these events, combined with their deadly consequences, highlighted how political violence could impact bystanders who possessed no strong ideological commitments to the conflicts that claimed their lives. Environmental and climate change deaths explored humanity's relationship with natural systems that had been altered by industrial activity and global warming. Kenny's encounters with extreme weather events, environmental disasters, and ecological collapse demonstrated how climate change could transform familiar environments into deadly hazards while revealing the inadequacy of individual responses to global-scale problems. The irony of Kenny's immortality, confronting environmental threats that could potentially end all human life, added cosmic significance to deaths that might otherwise be viewed as simple accidents. The mass extinction events and ecological catastrophes that occasionally claimed Kinney's life during this period positioned his individual mortality within the context of species-wide survival threats that dwarfed personal concerns about death and resurrection. When Kenny died through climate-related disasters, pollution, exposure, or ecosystem collapse, his deaths served as microcosms of larger environmental crises while maintaining the personal scale that made such abstract threats emotionally accessible to audiences. Psychological and emotional deaths during this era reflected the show's growing willingness to address mental health themes and the complex relationship between psychological trauma and physical mortality. These deaths explored how emotional distress, social isolation, and psychological manipulation could lead to fatal outcomes while examining the intersection between mental and physical health in contemporary society. The social media-driven depression and anxiety deaths that occasionally claimed Kenny's life demonstrated how digital environments could exacerbate existing mental health vulnerabilities while creating new forms of psychological stress. The comparison dynamics fostered by social media platforms, combined with the addictive properties of digital engagement, created psychological pressures that could prove fatal when combined with Kenny's unique circumstances. The isolation paradox of being constantly connected yet fundamentally alone became a recurring theme as Kenny's deaths reflected broader concerns about technology's impact on psychological well-being. Suicide references and self-harm themes began appearing more frequently during this period as the show addressed contemporary concerns about adolescent mental health and the rising rates of self-destructive behavior among younger demographics. Kenny's deaths, through deliberately self-inflicted harm, explored the complex motivations that could drive individuals toward self-destruction, while examining the social factors that contributed to such decisions. The show's treatment of these themes balanced dark humor with genuine concern for mental health awareness, using Kenny's unique relationship with death to examine suicide from perspectives unavailable to conventional storytelling approaches. The intervention and prevention deaths that resulted from well-intentioned but poorly executed mental health responses demonstrated how attempts to help struggling individuals could sometimes create additional dangers. When Kenny died through suicide prevention measures, therapeutic interventions, or institutional responses to mental health crises, his deaths revealed the complexity of psychological care and the unintended consequences that could emerge from systematic approaches to individual problems. Meta-commentary deaths during this period demonstrated the show's increasing self-awareness about Kenny's role within the series' mythology, while exploring the relationship between fictional violence and real-world concerns about media influence on behavior. These deaths often featured explicit references to Kenny's death history, audience expectations, and the show's own evolution, while maintaining the essential unpredictability that had always characterized his demise. The audience expectation deaths that played with viewer assumptions about Kenny's fate revealed how the show's creators had become conscious of their own patterns while seeking to subvert established expectations. When Kenny died, in ways that explicitly referenced previous deaths or acknowledged audience anticipation. These metatextual elements added layers of complexity to deaths that might otherwise be viewed as simple repetitions of established formulas. The show's willingness to examine its own mythology through Kenny's continued deaths demonstrated a level of self-reflection that transformed entertainment into artistic commentary. The media influenced deaths that explored connections between fictional violence and real-world behavior, used Kenny's unique circumstances to examine contemporary concerns about entertainment's impact on audience psychology. When Kenny died, through methods inspired by video games, movies, or other media sources, his deaths served as commentary on debates about media responsibility while maintaining the dark humor that characterized the show's approach to serious topics. The cultural phenomenon deaths that resulted from Kenny's status as an iconic character within popular culture demonstrated how fictional elements could transcend their original contexts to become part of broader social discourse. When Kenny died through circumstances directly related to his own cultural significance, these deaths created recursive loops that connected fictional narrative to real-world fan engagement, while exploring the relationship between entertainment and audience participation. These modern deaths collectively demonstrated how Kenny's fate had evolved to address contemporary concerns while maintaining the essential elements that had made his character compelling throughout the series' development. The adaptation of his death mythology to current events and emerging social issues revealed the continued relevance of his unique circumstances as a vehicle for cultural commentary and social criticism. The technological, political, environmental, and psychological themes that dominated these modern deaths reflected the complex challenges facing contemporary society, while using Kenny's immortality to explore solutions and consequences that would be impossible within conventional narrative frameworks. The unexplained science behind Kenny McCormick's repeated resurrections represents one of the most enduring mysteries within South Park's mythology, as the show has consistently maintained deliberate ambiguity about the precise mechanisms that restore him to life following each violent demise. This intentional vagueness has created a complex framework of supernatural possibilities, while avoiding definitive explanations that might diminish the mystery and horror that make Kenny's situation compelling. The resurrection process operates according to rules that appear consistent, yet remain fundamentally incomprehensible to both characters within the show and audiences attempting to understand the underlying logic. The temporal mechanics governing Kenny's return from death demonstrate a supernatural consistency that suggests systematic rather than random processes, yet the specific duration between death and resurrection varies according to factors that remain unclear to observers. In most cases, Kenny's resurrection occurs during the transition between episodes, allowing him to appear alive and well at the beginning of subsequent installments, without explanation for his recovery from whatever violent fate claimed him previously. This temporal displacement creates a sense of inevitability, while maintaining narrative convenience that prevents Kenny's deaths from disrupting the show's ongoing storylines. The overnight resurrection pattern that characterizes most of Kinney's returns suggests that the supernatural forces governing his fate operate according to schedules that prioritize restoration over explanation, treating his death as a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent condition. The consistency of this timing implies that resurrection occurs automatically, rather than through conscious intervention by external agents, suggesting that Kenny's immortality functions as an inherent property rather than a service provided by supernatural entities. The precision of this timing, combined with its reliability across hundreds of deaths, indicates systematic processes operating beyond human understanding or control. The physical restoration that accompanies Kenny's resurrection demonstrates supernatural capabilities that exceed natural healing processes. As his body returns to its pre-death condition, regardless of the extent of damage or destruction he experienced during his demise, whether Kenny died through dismemberment, disintegration, or complete obliteration, his resurrected form displays perfect physical integrity without scars, missing limbs, or other evidence of his previous traumatic experiences. This complete restoration suggests that the resurrection process operates by replacing rather than repairing Kenny's physical form, creating new bodies rather than healing damaged ones. The clothing restoration that accompanies Kenny's physical resurrection extends the supernatural process beyond biological healing to include material objects associated with his identity and appearance. His iconic orange parka, regardless of whether it was destroyed, contaminated, or lost during his death, consistently reappears in perfect condition as part of his resurrected form. This attention to material details suggests that the resurrection process operates according to conceptual rather than purely physical principles, restoring Kenny's complete identity rather than merely his biological functions. The psychological continuity that persists across Kenny's deaths and resurrections represents perhaps the most mysterious aspect of his supernatural condition, as his consciousness, memories, and personality remain intact despite the complete destruction of his physical form. Unlike his friends and family, who retain no memory of his deaths, Kenny maintains perfect recollection of every traumatic experience he has endured, creating an accumulated burden of suffering that transcends individual episodes. This selective preservation of consciousness suggests that Kenny's mental processes operate independently of his physical brain, existing within supernatural frameworks that exceed biological limitations. The memory preservation that allows Kenny to retain experiences from previous deaths creates a form of psychological immortality that parallels his physical resurrection, ensuring that knowledge gained through death persists beyond the destruction of the brain that acquired it. This supernatural memory storage implies that Kenny's consciousness exists within cosmic frameworks that transcend individual incarnations, maintaining continuity across multiple physical forms through mechanisms that exceed scientific understanding. The burden of remembering countless violent deaths would prove psychologically devastating to most individuals. Yet, Kenny's continued functionality suggests either supernatural, psychological protection or extraordinary personal resilience. The learning accumulation that results from Kenny's retained memories transforms his repeated deaths from meaningless suffering into educational experiences that provide him with unique insights into mortality, violence, and human nature. Each death adds to his understanding of dangerous situations and survival strategies, creating a cumulative wisdom that exceeds his apparent age and experience. This knowledge acquisition through trauma represents a form of supernatural education that would be impossible within normal human lifespans, suggesting that Kenny's immortality serves purposes beyond simple entertainment or cosmic cruelty. The selective amnesia that affects everyone except Kenny creates a localized reality distortion that prevents his deaths from generating lasting social or psychological consequences for his friends and family. This supernatural memory modification ensures that Kenny's repeated traumatic experiences do not disrupt the emotional stability of those around him, while maintaining the social relationships that provide meaning and purpose to his continued existence. The precision of this amnesia, which erases specific memories while preserving general relationships, suggests sophisticated supernatural intervention rather than simple forgetfulness. The family awareness exception that allows Kenny's parents and sister to retain some knowledge of his condition creates a middle ground between complete ignorance and full understanding, providing them with enough information to function within their supernatural circumstances, while protecting them from the full psychological impact of Kenny's suffering. This partial knowledge allows the McCormick family to maintain relatively normal relationships, despite their awareness that death holds no permanent meaning within their household. The stress of maintaining this knowledge while appearing normal to outside observers adds additional psychological burden to a family already struggling with poverty and dysfunction. The cosmic forces that appear to govern Kenny's resurrection operate according to scales and timelines that dwarf human understanding, treating his individual suffering as a minor component within larger supernatural purposes that may span geological epochs or cosmic cycles. The Cthulhu mythology that provides partial explanations for Kenny's condition suggests that his deaths and resurrections serve functions within cosmic horror frameworks, where individual human concerns hold no significance compared to otherworldly objectives. The indifference of these cosmic forces to Kenny's personal suffering highlights the arbitrary nature of supernatural intervention and the helplessness of mortals when confronted with entities operating beyond human comprehension. The ancient curse elements that apparently contributed to Kenny's condition through his family's involvement with supernatural entities demonstrate how past actions can create consequences that persist across generations, binding innocent individuals to cosmic forces they never chose to encounter. The generational nature of Kenny's curse suggests that supernatural debts and obligations operate according to principles that exceed individual lifespans, creating inherited suffering that cannot be resolved through personal effort or moral improvement. This multi-generational punishment highlights themes of inherited guilt and the persistence of supernatural consequences across family lines. The ritual requirements that may influence Kenny's resurrection process remain largely hidden from audience observation, though occasional references suggest that maintaining his immortality requires specific conditions or behaviors that must be satisfied to ensure his continued return from death. These unstated requirements create additional mystery around Kenny's condition, while suggesting that his immortality, rather than being unconditional, depends upon factors that could potentially be disrupted or altered. The possibility that Kenny's resurrection could be permanently prevented adds stakes to his situation while maintaining uncertainty about the permanence of his supernatural protection. The intervention possibilities that occasionally surface throughout the series suggest that Kenny's condition, while powerful, may not be entirely beyond human influence or supernatural modification. The various cosmic entities, religious figures, and supernatural forces that Kenny encounters throughout his adventures occasionally demonstrate awareness of his unique situation while hinting at potential solutions or alterations to his circumstances. These possibilities for change create hope that Kenny's suffering might eventually find resolution while maintaining the cosmic horror elements that make his situation compelling. The philosophical implications of Kenny's resurrection mechanics extend beyond entertainment value to explore fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and the relationship between physical existence and personal continuity. His situation challenges conventional assumptions about death as a final boundary, while examining what constitutes individual identity when physical form can be repeatedly destroyed and restored. The persistence of Kenny's consciousness across multiple physical incarnations raises questions about the relationship between mind and body that have occupied philosophers and theologians for millennia. The resurrection mechanics that govern Kenny's fate ultimately represent a carefully constructed mystery that serves multiple narrative functions while avoiding definitive explanations that might reduce the cosmic horror and supernatural wonder that make his situation compelling. The systematic ambiguity surrounding his resurrection process allows audiences to develop their own theories while maintaining the essential mystery that transforms simple cartoon violence into profound questions about mortality, suffering, and the nature of existence itself. The cultural phenomenon that emerged from Kenny McCormick's repeated deaths transcended the boundaries of animated television to become a defining element of popular culture that influenced everything from merchandise design to academic discourse about mortality in media. The phrase, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," evolved from a simple catchphrase into a cultural touchstone that demonstrated how fictional elements could achieve significance beyond their original context while maintaining relevance across multiple generations of audiences. This transformation from entertainment device to cultural symbol revealed the power of repetition and ritual to create meaning within seemingly meaningless violence. The international recognition that Kenny's deaths achieved demonstrated how American animated comedy could translate across cultural and linguistic boundaries while maintaining its essential impact and meaning. The catchphrase associated with his demise became recognizable in dozens of languages, with translations that preserved both the emotional content and rhythmic structure of the original English dialogue. The universal appeal of Kenny's situation suggested that themes of mortality, friendship, and resilience resonated across cultural differences, while the specific American context of his adventures provided a framework for understanding contemporary concerns that extended far beyond national boundaries. The merchandising empire that developed around Kenny's deaths created a unique category of commercial products that celebrated mortality and violence through children's toys and clothing, challenging conventional assumptions about appropriate themes for youth-oriented merchandise. T-shirts bearing Kenny's image, action figures designed to simulate his deaths, and video games that recreated his most famous demises transformed fictional violence into consumer goods while maintaining the dark humor that made such products appealing rather than disturbing. The commercial success of Kenny-related merchandise demonstrated society's comfort with fictional violence when presented within appropriate comedic contexts. The academic analysis that Kenny's deaths generated within university media studies programs elevated animated comedy to the level of serious cultural criticism while providing frameworks for understanding how entertainment media addressed contemporary social concerns. Scholarly papers examining the psychological implications of Kenny's immortality, the sociological significance of his friend's amnesia, and the philosophical questions raised by his supernatural circumstances transformed cartoon violence into legitimate subjects for academic inquiry. The integration of Kenny's mythology into university curricula demonstrated how popular culture could serve educational purposes while maintaining entertainment value. The parody and homage appearances that Kenny's deaths inspired across multiple media formats revealed how his situation had become a recognizable cultural reference point that other creators could employ to generate immediate recognition and emotional response from audiences. Television shows, movies, video games, and online content regularly featured characters experiencing Kenny-like deaths or situations that explicitly referenced his unique circumstances while adapting his mythology to serve their own narrative purposes. These cultural references demonstrated how fictional elements could achieve sufficient cultural penetration to become part of a shared vocabulary of symbols and meanings. The animation industry innovations that emerged from depicting Kenny's deaths pushed the boundaries of what television censors would accept, while demonstrating new techniques for portraying violence that maintained shock value without crossing into genuinely disturbing territory. The creative team's development of visual strategies for showing death and destruction, while preserving the show's comedic tone, influenced approaches to animated violence across the industry, while establishing precedents for addressing mature themes within formats traditionally associated with children's entertainment. The technical achievements in animating complex death sequences contributed to advancing the artistic capabilities of television animation. The censorship battles that Kenny's deaths generated across multiple countries revealed how different cultural contexts interpreted fictional violence, while demonstrating the power of animated content to challenge social boundaries and provoke meaningful discussions about appropriate entertainment standards. The varied international responses to Kenny's deaths, ranging from complete acceptance to total prohibition, provided case studies in cultural differences regarding violence, children's media, and artistic expression. These censorship conflicts highlighted how entertainment content could serve as vehicles for broader cultural debates about values, protection, and artistic freedom. The psychological research that Kenny's deaths inspired within academic psychology departments explored how audiences processed repeated fictional violence while examining the potential effects of exposure to such content on developing minds and social attitudes. Studies investigating viewer responses to Kenny's deaths provided insights into human psychology regarding violence, humor, and emotional processing, while contributing to broader discussions about media influence on behavior and social attitudes. The research generated by Kenny's situation demonstrated how fictional content could serve as valuable data for understanding human nature and social dynamics. The character development that Kenny achieved despite his repeated deaths revealed how consistent characterization could survive extreme narrative circumstances, while demonstrating that even characters defined by their victimhood could evolve into complex individuals with agency and depth. The gradual revelation of Kenny's personality, intelligence, and moral compass through his actions as Mysterion and his interactions with family members transformed him from a simple victim into a genuine hero whose suffering served larger purposes than entertainment. This character growth demonstrated that repetitive narrative elements need not prevent sophisticated character development when handled with creativity and respect for audience intelligence. The relationship dynamics that Kenny's deaths created within his friend group provided insights into how children process trauma, loss, and recovery, while exploring the psychological mechanisms that allow individuals to maintain relationships despite repeated exposure to violence and tragedy. The casual manner in which Stan, Kyle, and Cartman accepted Kenny's deaths while maintaining genuine affection for him revealed complex emotional strategies for coping with circumstances that exceeded normal understanding. These friendship bonds demonstrated resilience and adaptability, while suggesting that human connection could survive even supernatural circumstances that challenged basic assumptions about mortality and continuity. The social commentary potential that Kenny's deaths provided enabled the show's creators to address contemporary issues through metaphorical frameworks that made difficult topics accessible to audiences seeking entertainment rather than education. The versatility of Kenny's situation as a vehicle for exploring everything from healthcare policy to environmental destruction demonstrated how fictional suffering could illuminate real-world concerns while maintaining emotional distance necessary for comedic treatment. This commentary function elevated Kenny's deaths from simple shock humor to sophisticated social criticism that served educational purposes alongside entertainment value. The philosophical questions that Kenny's deaths raised about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence transformed animated comedy into a vehicle for exploring fundamental questions about human nature and the meaning of life. The implications of his immortality for understanding personal identity, the significance of memory in defining individual existence, and the relationship between physical form and conscious experience provided frameworks for examining philosophical concepts that might otherwise remain abstract and inaccessible. These intellectual dimensions added depth to entertainment content while demonstrating that popular culture could address serious subjects without sacrificing accessibility or humor. The technological influence that Kenny's deaths exercised on video game design, virtual reality experiences, and interactive media demonstrated how fictional concepts could inspire innovations in entertainment technology while pushing the boundaries of what digital media could achieve. The challenge of recreating Kenny's deaths in interactive formats encouraged developers to explore new approaches to depicting violence, character progression, and narrative consequences within digital environments. These technological applications extended Kenny's influence beyond passive entertainment into participatory experiences that allowed audiences to engage directly with his mythology. The generational impact that Kenny's deaths achieved across multiple decades of television history revealed how fictional elements could maintain relevance and significance across changing social contexts while adapting to address contemporary concerns. The ability of newer audiences to discover and appreciate Kenny's situation, despite its origins in earlier decades, demonstrated the timeless appeal of themes related to friendship, mortality, and resilience. This sustained relevance suggested that Kenny's mythology contained elements that transcended specific historical moments while remaining meaningful to successive generations of viewers. The cultural legacy that Kenny McCormick established through his repeated deaths ultimately demonstrated how fictional suffering could achieve significance beyond entertainment value while providing frameworks for understanding real-world concerns about violence, mortality, and human resilience. His transformation from simple cartoon victim to complex cultural symbol revealed the power of consistent storytelling and character development to create meaning within seemingly meaningless circumstances. The enduring appeal of Kenny's situation suggested that audiences possessed deep appreciation for stories that addressed fundamental human concerns through innovative narrative approaches that challenged conventional expectations about mortality, suffering, and the possibility of redemption through repeated trials. As we reach the conclusion of our comprehensive journey through Kenny McCormick's countless deaths and mysterious resurrections, we find ourselves confronting the profound paradox that defines his existence within the fictional universe of South Park and the broader landscape of popular culture. The orange parka that has become his signature garment represents far more than simple winter clothing, serving instead as a symbol of childhood innocence, repeatedly tested by forces beyond individual control or understanding. Through hundreds of deaths spanning decades of television history, Kenny has evolved from a simple comedic device into a complex meditation on mortality suffering, and the resilience of the human spirit. When confronted with circumstances that exceed rational comprehension, the pattern of death and resurrection that governs Kenny's fate offers both comfort and horror in equal measure, demonstrating how repetition can transform tragedy into routine, while never entirely eliminating the emotional impact of loss and renewal. Each death carries with it the promise of return, yet each resurrection brings with it the certainty of future suffering, creating a cycle that provides security through predictability while maintaining tension through the inevitable approach of unknown destruction. This eternal pattern reflects fundamental human anxieties about mortality, while offering the impossible comfort of guaranteed continuity beyond death. The evolution of Kenny's deaths, from simple shock humor to sophisticated cultural commentary, reveals how fictional elements can achieve significance that transcends their original entertainment purposes, while maintaining the essential characteristics that made them compelling in the first place. The progression from random accidents to cosmic inevitability demonstrates how storytelling can mature and develop complexity without abandoning the core elements that define character identity and audience connection. Kenny's journey from victim to hero to cosmic participant illustrates how fictional suffering can serve educational and philosophical purposes while preserving the emotional accessibility that makes such lessons meaningful to diverse audiences. The mystery that continues to surround the precise mechanisms of Kenny's resurrection maintains the sense of wonder and cosmic horror that elevates his situation beyond simple cartoon violence into genuine existential inquiry. The deliberate ambiguity that the creators have preserved regarding the supernatural forces governing his fate allows audiences to participate in constructing meaning while preventing definitive explanations that might diminish the mythological power of his unique circumstances. This ongoing mystery demonstrates how unanswered questions can serve narrative purposes more effectively than complete explanations when dealing with themes that exceed rational understanding. The friendship bonds that sustain Kenny throughout his supernatural trials reveal how human connection can provide meaning and purpose even within circumstances that challenge basic assumptions about mortality and continuity. The loyalty that Stan, Kyle, and Cartman maintain toward Kenny despite their supernatural amnesia regarding his deaths suggests that genuine affection operates according to principles that transcend conscious memory, while highlighting the power of emotional truth to persist even when factual knowledge proves unreliable. These relationships demonstrate that love and friendship can survive even the most extraordinary circumstances when they are based on authentic appreciation for individual character rather than mere circumstantial convenience. The burden of memory that Kenny carries regarding his repeated deaths transforms him into a unique repository of traumatic experience that would destroy most individuals, yet somehow strengthens his capacity for heroism and self-sacrifice. His ability to function despite accumulated suffering that spans centuries of subjective time reveals either supernatural psychological protection or extraordinary personal resilience that enables him to transform trauma into wisdom rather than allowing it to become debilitating dysfunction. This transformation of suffering into strength provides a model for understanding how individuals might survive and transcend circumstances that appear to exceed human endurance. The cosmic significance that Kinney's situation has achieved through its connection to ancient entities and otherworldly forces positions his individual suffering within frameworks that dwarf human concerns, while somehow maintaining the personal scale that makes his struggles emotionally accessible. The juxtaposition of cosmic horror with childhood friendship creates unique narrative tensions that allow exploration of universal themes through intimate personal relationships, while demonstrating how individual experiences can reflect larger patterns that operate across multiple scales of existence. This connection between personal and cosmic suffering reveals how fictional narratives can address both intimate human concerns and abstract philosophical questions simultaneously. The cultural impact that Kinney's deaths have achieved demonstrates how fictional elements can transcend their original contexts to become part of shared human vocabulary for discussing mortality, resilience, and the arbitrary nature of suffering. The phrase associated with his deaths has become a cultural touchstone that provides audiences with a framework for processing real-world tragedy while maintaining the emotional distance necessary for psychological survival in a world filled with genuine suffering and loss. This cultural function reveals how entertainment can serve therapeutic purposes while providing communities with shared rituals for acknowledging and processing difficult experiences. The technological and artistic innovations that emerged from depicting Kinney's deaths have influenced approaches to animated violence, while demonstrating how creative constraints can inspire artistic advancement rather than limiting creative expression. The challenge of portraying death and destruction within comedic contexts while maintaining audience engagement encouraged the development of visual techniques and storytelling approaches that have enriched the entire medium of animated entertainment. These artistic contributions demonstrate how fictional suffering can generate real-world creative advancement while pushing the boundaries of what entertainment media can achieve. The philosophical questions that Kinney's situation raises about consciousness, identity, and the nature of existence continue to provide frameworks for examining fundamental aspects of human experience, while making abstract concepts accessible through concrete fictional examples. His repeated deaths and resurrections offer unique perspectives on questions about personal continuity, the relationship between mind and body, and the significance of memory in defining individual identity that might otherwise remain purely theoretical. These intellectual contributions demonstrate how popular culture can serve educational purposes while maintaining entertainment value and emotional accessibility. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, consider the strange beauty of Kinney McCormick's curse and the profound questions it raises about suffering, friendship, and the nature of existence itself. In a universe where death appears final and suffering seems meaningless, Kinney offers the impossible comfort of renewal and the suggestion that even the most tragic circumstances might serve purposes beyond immediate understanding. His orange parka has become a symbol of hope wrapped in tragedy, representing the possibility that innocence can survive repeated destruction, while love can transcend even supernatural amnesia. The eternal cycle that governs Kenny's fate reflects the larger rhythms of life and death that govern all existence, compressed into the span of individual episodes, yet expanded across decades of storytelling that have made his situation both familiar and mysterious. Each morning brings Kenny back to life with the same optimism and friendship that defined his previous incarnation, suggesting that renewal is always possible, regardless of how completely destruction might appear to eliminate hope. In South Park, Colorado, death is not the end, but simply another beginning. In an endless cycle of mortality and rebirth that transforms suffering into strength and tragedy into triumph, through the persistent power of human connection and cosmic mystery. As we reach the end of our journey through Kenny McCormick's countless deaths and resurrections, we find ourselves contemplating the strange beauty of his curse. In a world where death is typically final, Kenny exists as a reminder that some patterns transcend the natural order. His orange parka has become a symbol not just of childhood innocence lost, but of resilience in the face of an indifferent universe. Each death teaches us something different about mortality, violence, and the human condition. From the absurd to the profound, Kenny's demises have evolved from simple shock comedy to complex commentary on society, fate, and the nature of existence itself. His resurrections offer both hope and horror, the promise that death need not be final, coupled with the nightmare of endless repetition. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember Kenny McCormick, the boy who dies so that others might laugh, who suffers so that we might reflect, and who returns each morning with the eternal optimism of childhood, ready to face whatever impossible end awaits him next. In South Park, Colorado, death is not the end. It is simply another beginning in an endless cycle of mortality and rebirth.